Don't touch my car. The woman's voice was like ice, freezing Nathan Brooks mid-motion. He shrugged, stepping back with a neutral expression. Not my problem, he replied, turning to walk away into the rain. But as he moved, a car behind them lost control, hydroplaning directly toward her. Nathan didn't think. He lunged back, pulling her violently out of the path of death. The crash echoed behind them, a twisted mess of metal. Nathan let go, his face unreadable. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just knelt by her engine and started fixing it. I wish you were mine, she whispered. Nathan Brooks was 37 years old, but his eyes looked like they had seen a century of storms. He lived in the quiet, dusty outskirts of the city, a place where the neon lights of the skyscrapers were just a faint, hazy glow on the horizon. Nathan was a man of steel and absolute silence. He operated a mobile roadside assistance service, driving an old but meticulously maintained heavy-duty truck that carried every tool known to man. To the locals, he was simply known as the ghost mechanic, the man who could fix anything that had a pulse of electricity or a drop of fuel, but who spoke to almost no one. His entire world was contained within the four peeling walls of a modest two-bedroom house, and it revolved around a single bright son, his 9-year-old daughter, Chloe. 2 years ago, Nathan's life had been shattered into a million jagged pieces when his wife, Sarah, passed away after a long, grueling battle with an illness that drained their savings and their joy. Since then, Nathan had systematically cut out every unnecessary part of his life. He didn't go to bars, he didn't date, he didn't have hobbies, he worked until his back ached, he cooked nutritious meals for Chloe, he checked her homework with a tired smile, and he slept, rarely more than 5 hours a night. Nathan was famous in the suburban area for two things: his genius with engines and his absolute unwavering refusal to tolerate arrogance. He had been known to pack up his expensive tools and drive away from a wealthy customer just because they spoke to him like he was a servant or a piece of equipment. He wasn't interested in their money if it came with a side of condescension. He was carefully calculating every penny: Chloe's private tuition, the rising rent, the medical debts that still hung over him like a suffocating black cloud. But his dignity was the one thing he refused to sell. Chloe was a bright, observant child who possessed a wisdom far beyond her years. She saw her father moving through life like a machine, his hands always stained with the deep, metallic scent of oil, his shoulders permanently hunched from the weight of his responsibilities. She loved him fiercely, but she missed the version of him that used to laugh until his eyes watered. Now he was just a provider, a silent, reliable shield between her and the harsh realities of the world. On the other side of the glass and steel divide was Vivienne Laurent. At 32, she was the CEO of Laurent Mobility, a multi-billion-dollar empire that defined the future of luxury transportation and autonomous driving technology. Vivienne was a creature of the global spotlight, though she hated the heat and the artificiality of it. She was striking, elegant, and possessed a mind that worked faster than the proprietary supercomputers her company manufactured. Vivienne was currently standing on the edge of a razor-sharp knife. Her company was only days away from signing a historic merger with a massive global investment fund. It was a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a deal that would either cement her legacy as the greatest innovator of her generation, or, if it failed, lead to a hostile takeover by her many rivals on the board of directors. She lived in a world where everyone wanted a piece of her, where every smile was a calculated move in a game of chess, and where she couldn't even trust the air she breathed in her own boardroom. That rainy Tuesday night, after a brutal 14-hour negotiation that left her feeling empty, Vivienne did something she never did. She dismissed her security detail and her private driver. She needed to feel the road. She needed to be in total control of something, even if it was just a steering wheel. She drove out toward the coast, away from the prying eyes of the press and the suffocating expectations of her family. But 50 miles out, in the middle of a torrential downpour, the sophisticated electronics of her prototype Grand Tourer flickered and died. The car rolled to a silent, humiliating stop on a dark, rain-slicked stretch of road near Nathan's district. Nathan happened to be passing by on his way home from a late-night rescue of a stranded semi-truck. A bottle of fever medicine for Chloe sat on his passenger seat, a reminder of the small, fragile life he was protecting. When he saw the sleek, silver car on the shoulder, he pulled over out of habit. He saw a woman in a tailored suit, looking frustrated, vulnerable, and dangerously beautiful, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of cold, regal authority. The hook moment happened. She snapped at him with the arrogance of a queen. He turned to leave with the indifference of a man who had seen it all, and then life intervened in the form of a hydroplaning sedan. The near miss changed the vibration of the night forever. As Nathan knelt in the freezing mud to fix her car without a word of complaint, Vivian watched him. She saw a man who had just saved her life and didn't even care to ask for her name or reward. He didn't look at her like she was a billionaire or a prize to be won. He looked at her like she was just another person with a broken machine in a world that was full of them. And for the first time in her adult life, Vivienne Laurent felt a strange, terrifying, and exhilarating pull towards someone who didn't want anything from her but for her car to start. If you were Nathan, would you have walked away after her "don't touch my car" comment, or stayed to help, comment "leave" or "help"? Nathan's movements were surgical and rhythmic. He didn't need a high-end laptop to diagnose the car's high-tech brain. He used his ears to listen to the relay clicks and a simple multimeter to trace the current. He bypassed the corrupted sensor that had triggered the ignition kill switch and breathed life back into the engine in less than 10 minutes of focused labor. The Silver Beast roared to life, its powerful LED headlights cutting through the sheets of rain like twin swords. Vivian reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. It was more money than Nathan earned in an average week of grueling labor. She held it out to him, her hand trembling slightly from the lingering adrenaline of the near-death experience. "Take it," she said, her voice regaining some of its sharp CEO edge, "and give me your business card. I'll have my executive office send a proper formal thank you tomorrow." Nathan didn't even look at the money. He wiped his hands on the greasy rag and checked the professional invoice app on his phone with a steady thumb. "The service call is $85. The after-hours emergency fee is $20. The total is $105. I don't take tips or thank yous from people who tell me not to touch their property before they even know my name." Vivian was stunned into silence. She was used to people groveling for a mere fraction of what she was currently offering. "You saved my life, Nathan. That's worth significantly more than $100. "I saved a person," Nathan said, finally looking her directly in the eye, his gaze as hard as the iron he worked with. "The car was a separate job. Pay the bill or I'll disable the bypass and leave you here to figure out the electronics yourself." She paid the exact amount, her mind reeling from the rejection. She watched his old, dented truck disappear into the rainy darkness, the red taillights fading like dying embers in a fireplace. She didn't know his name, only the business name stenciled on the side of the truck: Brooks Recovery and Repair. The next morning, Vivian found she couldn't focus on the numbers. Her board members were arguing about profit margins and quarterly projections, but all she could see was the calm, grease-stained face of the man in the rain. She tasked her most trusted personal assistant with finding him. By noon, a thin manila folder was on her desk. Nathan Brooks, widower, single father. No significant debt except for mounting medical bills from his late wife's treatment. A man with a flawless but quiet reputation for honesty and technical brilliance. Under the flimsy guise of a follow-up safety inspection for her car, Vivian drove herself to Nathan's garage. It was a small, three-bay shop tucked behind a dense row of pine trees on the edge of the county line. It was clean, highly organized, and smelled of heavy oil, burnt rubber, and strong black coffee. Nathan was working deep in the engine of a rusted-out family minivan when she arrived. He looked up, recognized her instantly, and went right back to his work. "The bypass should hold for about a week. You should take it to a certified dealership for a permanent firmware update." "I'd rather you did it," Vivian said, stepping deeper into the garage. Her expensive heels looked entirely ridiculous on the oil-stained concrete floor, but she didn't seem to notice or care. Just then, Chloe emerged from a small, glass-walled office area carrying a heavy science textbook. "Dad, I can't figure out the circuit diagram for the robotics project," she said. then stopped abruptly when she saw the elegant woman standing there. Vivian watched as Nathan's entire demeanor underwent a radical transformation. The ice in his eyes melted away instantly. He dropped his heavy wrench, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and sat next to his daughter at a small, folding card table. He spent 5 minutes explaining the flow of electricity and the logic of the sensor, his voice soft, patient, and full of a love that Vivian had never experienced. She had grown up in literal palaces, but she had never had a single moment of such pure, focused attention from her own father. The tension in the garage shifted when Nathan's regular morning customers began to arrive. They recognized Vivian from the national news, the Laurent mobility queen. They began to whisper, some even sneaking photos on their phones. Vivian felt the familiar cold wall of her celebrity status rising up to protect her, but Nathan ignored the noise completely. He treated her like any other customer, making her wait her turn in line behind a man with a broken radiator. "You're really not going to ask for a favor, are you?" Vivian asked when they were finally alone again in the bay. "Most people in this city would be asking for a high-paying job or a venture capital investment by now." Nathan looked at her, leaning his hip against his sturdy workbench. "I already have a job, and I don't like partners. I've found that when people give you large sums of money, they start to think they own a piece of your soul. My soul is currently promised to my daughter and the memory of my wife. There's no vacancy for a billionaire." It was then that Vivian whispered the words again, but this time, in the quiet of the shop, Nathan heard them with perfect clarity. "I wish you were mine." She didn't mean it as a romantic conquest or a flirtation. It was a deep, guttural cry for the stability and the integrity he possessed. Nathan didn't answer. He couldn't. He knew they lived on entirely different planets with different laws of gravity. He turned back to the car, but his heart, which he had tried to keep in cold storage for 2 years, gave a single painful throb of recognition. The tension reached a breaking point when a flatbed truck arrived at the garage later that day, carrying a Laurent Mobility corporate vehicle. The driver claimed the brakes had failed during a routine high-speed test. Nathan spent 10 minutes under the chassis and came out with a dark, dangerous expression. "This didn't fail due to wear, Vivian," Nathan said, his voice dropping low so his other mechanics couldn't hear. "The hydraulic lines were notched with a blade. Someone wanted this car to crash, and if you're the one driving these prototypes, they want you to crash too." Do you think Vivian is truly attracted to Nathan? Or is she just overwhelmed because he's the first person who doesn't want her money? Comment real or lonely. Nathan's warning sent a massive shockwave through Vivian's entire system. She wanted to believe it was a freak accident, but she knew the vultures on her board of directors too well. She invited Nathan to the Laurent headquarters to perform an independent, off-the-books audit of the entire prototype fleet. He initially refused, wanting to stay in his safe bubble, but Vivian was desperate. "Nathan, I don't trust my own lead engineers anymore," she pleaded in the garage. "If the merger goes through while there's a safety scandal, the company collapses. Thousands of families lose their income. I'll pay your standard service rate, no more, no less. Just give me the unvarnished truth." Nathan looked at Chloe, who was listening intently from the doorway. He thought about the debt. He thought about the risk to the workers. He agreed, but only on his own strict terms. When Nathan arrived at the Laurent Mobility skyscraper the next morning, the atmosphere was openly hostile. He was a man in flannel and heavy work boots, in a cathedral of Italian silk and expensive silicone. The security guards sneered at his metal toolbox. The lead technical director, a man named Marcus, who had a massive stake in the rival board faction, openly mocked him during a high-level briefing. "We have MIT graduates and the best diagnostic AI in the world," Marcus sneered, looking at Nathan's oil-stained hands with disgust. "What is a street mechanic from the sticks going to find that our neural networks haven't already flagged?" This was Nathan's moment of public humiliation. Marcus went on to imply that Nathan was only there because he had charmed the CEO, suggesting Nathan was nothing more than a common gold digger. Nathan didn't argue. He didn't defend himself with words. He simply walked to the main server terminal in the lab and requested the raw sensor logs from the crash prototype, the data from before it was cleaned for the official board report. "The AI only looks for what you specifically tell my Nathan said, his voice echoing in the silent high-tech boardroom. It doesn't look for the physical mark of a hand file on a steel line. The room went into a freeze moment. Nathan pulled up a high-resolution microscopic scan of a brake line. He pointed to a microscopic burr in the metal. It wasn't a wear-and-tear snap. It was a precision cut made with a specific type of industrial shears that were only used in the Laurent internal prototype lab. Your AI said it was a software glitch because the pressure dropped, Nathan said, looking directly at Marcus. But the metal doesn't lie. Someone in this building has blood on their hands, and a very clear motive. The room erupted into a symphony of shouting. Marcus tried to have Nathan removed by force, but Vivian stood her ground. He stays. You leave, Marcus. Your security access is revoked pending an immediate criminal investigation. But the twist didn't end there. As Nathan was leaving the building an hour later, he saw a black SUV with tinted windows following his truck. He realized that by helping Vivian, he had put a giant target on his own back. He led the SUV on a high-speed chase through the industrial district, using his superior knowledge of the roads to lose them in the maze of warehouses. He rushed home to find Chloe, but his house was dark and the front door was slightly ajar. His heart plummeted into his stomach. Had they taken her? He burst through the door, a heavy wrench in his hand, only to find Vivian sitting at his kitchen table with Chloe. Vivian's face was pale and her hands were clasped tight. I had my private security bring her here as soon as I saw the SUV on the lab cameras, Vivian said. I'm so sorry, Nathan. I didn't realize how far they would go to protect their secret. Damian Kessler, my vice president, he's the one behind the sabotage. He's working with a rival investment fund to drive our stock price down so they can buy us for pennies. He knows you found the physical proof. Nathan was furious, the protective father in him screaming, You brought your corporate war to my front door, Vivian. I told you I wanted no part of this life. I know, she whispered, tears finally breaking through her professional armor. But you're the only person who can help me stop him. The final merger meeting is tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If I don't have the physical evidence and a witness the board actually respects for his honesty, it's over. The company dies and Damian wins. Nathan looked at Chloe, who was holding Vivian's hand. The little girl looked at her father with a steady gaze. Dad, if the bad men win, more people will get hurt, right? Like Mom used to say, you have to fix what's broken. Nathan realized he couldn't go back to being a ghost. The world had found him in his garage, and he had to fight his way back to the silence. He spent the entire night in the garage, working with Vivian on a technical presentation that would dismantle Damian's lies with the cold, hard logic of engineering. For the first time that night, Vivian saw the true man behind the mechanic. She saw his brilliance, his fierce protection of his daughter, and his absolute refusal to be intimidated by wealth or power. She saw a man who was whole despite his immense loss, and Nathan saw a woman who was drowning in her own success, a woman who just wanted to feel safe for one night. If you were Nathan, would you continue helping Vivian even after your daughter's safety was threatened? Comment, stay or run. The merger meeting the next morning was a theater of immense tension. Damian Kessler sat at the head of the long mahogany table, already acting like the new CEO. He had the board members convinced that Vivian was unstable and that Nathan Brooks was a fraudulent conspirator she had hired to cover up her own technical failures. When Vivian walked in, the board members looked away in shame or anger. But then Nathan entered behind her. He wasn't in a suit. He was still wearing his work flannel and jeans, but he carried a heavy metal briefcase with the authority of a general. Damian laughed, a sound full of hollow confidence. Is this the expert? He looks like he just crawled out from under a garbage truck. Security, remove this intruder. Nathan didn't look at Vivian nor the security guards. He looked directly at Damian. I did crawl out from under a truck, and I found something you dropped in the lab. Nathan opened the briefcase and pulled out a set of industrial shears. They were engraved with Damian's personal employee ID, a gold-plated gift from the company for 10 years of service. Nathan then played a video on the massive main screen. It wasn't a corporate film, it was a high-speed microscopic forensic reconstruction of the cuts on the brake lines, matched perfectly to the unique teeth of those specific shears. You didn't want the merger contract, Damian, Nathan said, his voice cold, steady. and amplified by the silence of the room. You wanted her dead before the signature was dry so you could collect the insurance payout and the executive buyout from the rival fund. The room froze. It was the ultimate freeze moment. Damien scrambled for a desperate lie, accusing Nathan of planting the evidence. But Nathan had one final devastating card to play. He produced a digital log he had recovered from the prototype's black box that showed a remote command sent from Damien's personal tablet to override the car's emergency braking system. Damien was escorted out by security in a state of total, shivering collapse. The board was silent, humbled and terrified by the man they had mocked only hours before. The merger was saved, but on Vivian's terms, with Damien's shares liquidated to pay for the workers' pensions. After the chaos settled and the lawyers took over, Nathan walked out of the skyscraper. He didn't wait for the board's hollow thanks. He didn't wait for a reward check. He just wanted the smell of the pine trees and the sound of Chloe's voice. Vivian caught up to him at his truck in the parking garage. She looked exhausted, but for the first time in years, the crushing weight seemed to have shifted from her heart. "I didn't wish you were mine because you fixed my car, Nathan," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I wished it because, for the first time in my life, I felt safer with a stranger in the mud than I did with all my money in a penthouse. You showed me that I don't have to be the Iron Empress to be a leader." Nathan looked at her for a long time. He reached out and for the first time touched her cheek, gently brushing away a stray hair. "You were always a leader, Vivian. You just didn't have anyone to watch your back while you fought the war. But my truck only has 2 seats. One is for me, and one is for Chloe. Maybe it's time for a bigger truck," she whispered, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips. Should Nathan keep his distance to protect his quiet life, or give Vivian a real chance? Comment distance or chance. Life didn't change overnight, but the rhythm of the outskirts began to shift in a beautiful way. Vivian stayed as the CEO of Laurent Mobility, but she became a fundamentally different kind of leader. She fired the sycophants and the liars, and she began hiring based on what she called the Brooks Standard, unwavering honesty and technical integrity. She began to show up in the suburban neighborhood, not in a prototype sports car, but in a modest, reliable SUV. Nathan didn't accept a high-paying job at the corporation. He kept his garage and his independence. But the medical debts that had haunted his sleep were suddenly and mysteriously paid off in full. Chloe got a new bicycle and the most advanced science equipment money could buy, and she excelled in her studies. Vivian became a frequent, unexpected guest at the small house behind the pine trees. She learned how to make pancakes that weren't burnt on the edges. She learned how to talk about science projects for hours without checking her phone for stock updates. And slowly, Chloe began to call her V. Nathan realized that he hadn't just rescued a billionaire on a rainy night. He had rescued a woman who was just as stranded as he was. Though her car was made of gold and glass instead of rust and steel, he had allowed a new person into his tight circle, and for the first time since the storm of his wife's death, the house felt warm and full of light. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange over the pines, Nathan was under his own truck, finishing a long day. Vivian sat on an old crate nearby, watching him work with a quiet admiration. "I still wish you were mine," she said, her voice now filled with a quiet, playful, and deep confidence. Nathan slid out from under the truck on his creeper, his face smudged with oil, but he was finally smiling. A real warm smile that reached his eyes and stayed there. He took her hand, his calloused skin against her soft palm, and pulled her closer. "Then stop wishing," he said. And in that quiet garage, surrounded by the tools and the engines that had built his life, the vast distance between their two worlds finally and completely vanished. True value is never found in what you own or the title on your business card, but in who you are when everything else is taken away. Nathan didn't save Vivian with money or political power. He saved her with the one thing she couldn't buy in any market: unconditional integrity. And Vivian didn't change Nathan with her immense wealth. She changed him by showing him that it's okay to let someone else watch your back. Sometimes the person you think needs saving is the one who will eventually show you the way back to your own heart. Love isn't about finding someone who has everything. It's about finding someone who needs nothing from you but your presence in your truth. If you believe that real love begins when someone values who you are more than what you have, comment value below. Subscribe to Iron Dad Stories for more powerful, heart-touching stories about the everyday heroes who remind us what truly matters in this life. Thank you for watching.